It was the last weekend of summer, and we were determined to make it unforgettable. My friends and I had planned a beach party, our final hurrah, before the new school year began. The sun was starting to set as we hauled coolers, blankets, and a portable speaker down to our favorite spot on the shore. There were 8 of us. Me, Sarah, Jake, Emily, Matt, Lisa, Tom, and Anna. We had known each other since high school and had spent countless summers together. The beach was crowded, but not overwhelmingly so. Families were packing up their beach gear, and groups of teenagers, like us, were just settling in for the night. The air was warm, and a light breeze carried the salty scent of the ocean. We set up our little camp, spreading out blankets and arranging the coolers in a semicircle. Someone turned on the speaker, and music filled the air, blending with the sound of waves crashing on the shore. As the sky darkened, the party atmosphere grew. We were laughing, talking, and enjoying each other's company. Tom and Jake were building a bonfire with driftwood they had collected earlier, while the rest of us were mingling and sipping on cold drinks. It was around this time that I noticed him. He was standing a little way down the beach, just beyond the reach of our fire's light. At first I thought he was just another beachgoer enjoying the night, but something about the way he stood there, watching us, made me uneasy. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and his face was obscured by the shadows. "Hey guys," I said, nudging Sarah, who was sitting next to me. "Do you see that guy over there?" Sarah squinted in the direction I was pointing. "Yeah, weird. Maybe he's just shy." "Or a serial killer," Jake joked, coming over to join us. "Want me to go over and say hi?" "No, let's just keep an eye on him for now," I said, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. "He's probably harmless." As the night went on, the stranger didn't leave. In fact, he seemed to be inching closer to our group, blending in with the darkness. Every now and then I'd catch glimpses of him out of the corner of my eye, but whenever I turned to look directly at him, he would stop moving. The others started to notice him too. "Seriously, what is that guy's deal?" Emily whispered to me, her eyes wide with concern. "Let's just ignore him," Matt suggested, trying to lighten the mood. "He's probably just a lonely dude looking for some company." But it was hard to ignore him. His presence cast a shadow over our festivities, and the laughter began to die down. The stranger's behavior grew more unsettling. He would disappear for a while, only to reappear even closer than before. At one point I thought I saw him crouching near our cooler, but when I turned my head, he was gone. The turning point came when Lisa let out a sharp scream. We all jumped, turning to see what had startled her. The stranger was standing just a few feet away from our group, his face finally visible in the firelight. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and a creepy smile played on his lips. "Who are you?" Tom demanded, stepping protectively in front of Lisa. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head to the side, as if studying us. The firelight cast eerie shadows on his face, making him look almost ghostly. "Look, man, if you don't leave, we're calling the cops," Jake threatened, pulling out his phone. The stranger's smile widened. "There's no need for that," he said in a low, raspy voice. "I'm just here to join the party." His words sent chills down my spine. There was something off about him, something deeply unsettling. The way he spoke, the way he moved, it all felt wrong. "We don't want any trouble," Matt said, trying to defuse the situation. "But you're making everyone uncomfortable. Please just go." The stranger took a step closer, and we all instinctively moved back. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." "And what exactly is that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. He looked at each of us in turn, his eyes lingering on me. "A little fun," he replied, his smile turning into a sinister grin. That was enough for Jake. He lunged at the stranger, but the man was surprisingly quick. He sidestepped Jake's attack and shoved him to the ground with a force that seemed impossible for his thin frame. Panic set in. The girls screamed and the guys tried to tackle the stranger, but he was too fast, too strong. In the chaos, I managed to grab one of the fire pokers and brandished it like a weapon. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice shaking. The stranger paused, his eyes narrowing. "You think that will stop me?" he taunted. In a moment of bravery, or perhaps sheer desperation, I swung the poker at him. He dodged, but it gave Jake and Tom enough time to get back on their feet. Together we managed to overpower him, pushing him away from our group. Breathing heavily, I looked around at my friends. They were all shaken, but unharmed. The stranger stood a few feet away, his smile gone, replaced by a look of pure rage. "This isn't over," he hissed, before turning and disappearing into the darkness. We didn't wait to see if he would come back. We quickly packed up our things and left the beach, sticking together as we made our way to the parking lot. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The experience left a lasting impact on us. We had always felt safe at the beach, surrounded by friends and familiar faces. But that night we learned how quickly things could change. We realized the importance of being aware of our surroundings, of trusting our instincts, and of looking out for each other. It was a hard lesson to learn, but one we would never forget. The beach, once a place of joy and relaxation, now held a darker memory, and the stranger's words haunted me long after that night. "This isn't over." It was a reminder that danger could be lurking anywhere, even in the places we felt safest. From then on, we were more cautious. We always made sure to stick together, to watch out for one another, and to be mindful of the people around us. The beach party had taught us that sometimes the scariest things weren't the monsters from our nightmares, but the real people we encountered in our everyday lives. The small coastal town where I grew up had its fair share of local legends, but none were more well known than the one about the dangerous currents at Crescent Beach. Nestled between rugged cliffs and dense, fog-covered forests, Crescent Beach was both beautiful and mysterious. The legend had been passed down through generations. Anyone who ignored the warnings about the currents would be claimed by the sea. Locals spoke of eerie occurrences, people disappearing without a trace, ghostly figures seen on the shore at twilight, and the chilling whispers of the lost carried on the wind. The older residents claimed that these warnings weren't just superstition. They were rooted in real tragedies. Every summer, tourists would flock to our little town, drawn by the allure of the beach. And every summer, despite the numerous signs and warnings, someone would test the legend, often with disastrous consequences. I had heard the stories all my life, but like many young people, I thought I was invincible. My name is Jake, and this is the story of how I learned to respect the power of the sea the hard way. It was the summer before I left for college, and my friends and I were determined to make the most of our last carefree days. We spent almost every day at Crescent Beach, surfing, swimming, and soaking up the sun. One particularly hot afternoon, after a few beers and some friendly dares, I decided to go for a swim. My friends, Emily, Jason, and Catherine, lounged on the sand, too lazy from the heat to join me. I waved off their half-hearted warnings, grinning as I ran towards the water. The tide was coming in, and the waves were higher than usual, but I felt confident. After all, I had swum here countless times before. The water was refreshing, cooling me down instantly as I dove under the first wave. I swam out, feeling the familiar rhythm of the ocean around me. The sun glinted off the water's surface, creating a dazzling display that almost made me forget about the legend. I could hear the distant laughter of my friends mingling with the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. For a while, everything was perfect. I floated on my back, letting the gentle waves carry me, feeling completely at peace. But as I drifted further out, I noticed a sudden change. The water, which had been warm and welcoming, grew colder. The waves became more erratic, pulling me in different directions. I felt a strange tugging at my legs, subtle at first, but growing stronger. It took me a moment to realize that I was being pulled out to sea. Panic set in as I remembered the stories about the currents. I tried to swim back towards the shore, but the current was too strong. Each stroke seemed to take me further away instead of closer. I could barely make out my friends on the beach now, their figures small and indistinct. "Help," I shouted, but my voice was lost in the roar of the ocean. My arms and legs burned with the effort of trying to fight the current, and I felt myself tiring quickly. The fear was overwhelming. I had always dismissed the warnings as exaggerated tales, but now, caught in the current's grip, I understood the truth behind the legend. I struggled to keep my head above water, gasping for breath as waves crashed over me. My mind raced, trying to remember everything I had learned about escaping a rip current swim parallel to the shore. Don't panic. But it was hard to stay calm when every instinct screamed at me to fight against the pull. Just as I was about to give up, I saw a lifeguard's red float bobbing in the distance. It was Jason, my best friend since childhood, who had seen me struggling and had swum out with the lifeguard. Relief and fear mingled in my chest as they approached. Jason's face was pale with worry, but he kept his voice steady. Jake grabbed the float. "We're going to get you out of here," he shouted over the noise of the waves. With their help, I clung to the float, feeling the sharp sting of salt water in my eyes and mouth. It took all my remaining strength to hold on as they pulled me towards the shore. The journey back felt like an eternity, but eventually my feet touched the sandy bottom. I stumbled onto the beach, collapsing in exhaustion. My friends crowded around me, their faces a mix of relief and concern. Emily wrapped a towel around my shoulders, and Catherine handed me a bottle of water. I could see the lifeguard talking to Jason, likely giving him a stern lecture about the dangers of the currents. "Man, you scared the hell out of us," Jason said, his voice shaking slightly. "Why didn't you listen to the warnings?" I didn't have an answer. All I could do was sit there, trembling from the cold and the adrenaline, feeling a deep sense of shame. The local legend had almost claimed another victim, and it was entirely my fault for not taking it seriously. As I sat there, watching the waves crash against the shore, I realized how close I had come to becoming just another story. The experience changed me. I used to think the warnings were just there to scare tourists, but now I understood their importance. The ocean is beautiful but unforgiving, and it demands respect. From that day on, I made a promise to myself to always heed the warnings, no matter how confident I felt. I also made it my mission to share my story with others. I wanted to make sure that no one else would have to go through what I did. The legend of Crescent Beach wasn't just a tale to keep kids in line. It was a vital piece of advice for anyone who set foot in those waters. As I recovered from the ordeal, I found myself often reflecting on the incident. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I started volunteering with the local lifeguard team, educating beachgoers about the dangers of the currents and the importance of safety measures. It was my way of giving back, of turning a near tragedy into something positive. Looking back now, I can see how much that day changed my perspective. It taught me that legends and warnings often have roots in real events, and that it's crucial to respect the forces of nature. I was lucky to have survived my encounter with the currents of Crescent Beach, and I hope my story serves as a reminder to others to always take safety seriously, no matter where they are or what they're doing. I've been a lifeguard for almost 3 years now, but there's something about the old lifeguard tower on East Shore Beach that has always unnerved me. The tower is a tall wooden structure that has stood on the beach for over 50 years. It's been battered by countless storms, yet it remains a silent sentinel overlooking the ocean. To most, it's just a part of the scenery, a place where lifeguards keep watch over swimmers and sunbathers. But to those of us who work there, it holds a different kind of significance. The tower was built in the late 1960s, a time when the beach was just starting to become a popular destination. It was state-of-the-art back then, equipped with everything a lifeguard might need. Over the years, though, it's been updated and renovated, but its basic structure has remained the same. Its white paint is now chipped and faded, and the wood creaks underfoot, but it still offers the best vantage point on the beach. Local legend has it that the tower was built on the site of an old shipwreck, and that the spirits of those lost at sea haunt the beach. I never gave much credence to these stories, until I started working there and hearing the tales from other lifeguards. My first day on the job, I was paired with an older lifeguard named Dave. He'd been working at East Shore Beach for over a decade and knew the place like the back of his hand. As we climbed up to the tower, he started telling me about some of the strange things he'd experienced over the years. "You'll hear things," he said, his voice low. "Voices, whispers. Sometimes you'll see shadows moving along the beach when there's no one there. It's just part of the job here." I laughed it off at first, thinking he was just trying to scare the new guy. But as the weeks went by, I started to notice things myself. It was subtle at first. Footsteps in the sand when I was alone, the feeling of being watched. Then there were the nights when I had the late shift. The beach would be empty, the only sound the waves crashing against the shore, but I'd hear whispers on the wind, faint and indistinct. One night I saw a figure standing at the water's edge. It was a foggy evening, the kind where the mist rolls in off the ocean and blankets everything. I called out, thinking it was someone in trouble, but there was no response. When I shined my flashlight, the figure was gone. I chalked it up to the fog playing tricks on my eyes, but it left me feeling unsettled. I wasn't the only one experiencing these strange occurrences. Other lifeguards had their own stories to tell. Jamie, one of the newer lifeguards, swore she saw a woman in a long dress walking along the shore one evening. When she went to investigate, there were no footprints in the sand. Robert, a lifeguard who had been working there for a few years, told me about a time he heard someone calling his name while he was on patrol. He searched the beach but found no one. The voice had sounded eerily familiar, like a friend from his childhood, but he couldn't place it. Then there was Jess, the head lifeguard, who had seen the most unsettling thing of all. She was on the night shift, keeping an eye on the beach from the tower, when she saw a child playing near the water. She rushed down, thinking it was a lost child, but when she reached the spot, there was no one there. No child, no footprints, nothing. She said the child had been laughing, a sound that still haunted her. As these stories piled up, I began to delve into the history of the lifeguard tower and the beach. The local library had old newspapers and records that went back decades. I spent hours poring over them, looking for anything that might explain the strange happenings. I found stories about shipwrecks, like Dave had mentioned. One in particular stood out. A passenger ship that had run aground during a storm in the early 1900s. Many of the passengers and crew had perished, their bodies never recovered. There were accounts of strange lights seen on the beach afterward, and rumors that the spirits of the drowned haunted the area. There were also stories about the tower itself. A lifeguard had died there in the 1970s, struck by lightning during a freak storm. Some said his spirit still watched over the beach, protecting swimmers from harm. Others believed that his death had somehow awakened the spirits of those lost at sea, binding them to the tower. The climax of my own experience came one night during a particularly fierce storm. I was scheduled for the late shift, and as the storm rolled in, the beach was deserted. I hunkered down in the tower, watching the waves crash against the shore, the wind howling around me. The rain was so heavy it was like a curtain of water, making it nearly impossible to see anything. I was on edge, the stories and my own experiences running through my mind. I kept telling myself it was just a storm, nothing to worry about. But then I heard it. A voice calling my name. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the wind, but it was unmistakable. Damon. I froze, my heart pounding. I shone my flashlight out into the storm, but I couldn't see anything. The voice came again, closer this time. Damon, help me. It sounded like a child. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight and ran down the steps of the tower into the storm. The wind nearly knocked me off my feet, and the rain stung my face, but I pushed on, following the voice. Damon, over here. I reached the water's edge, my flashlight beam barely cutting through the darkness. And then I saw it, a small figure standing in the surf. It looked like a child, but there was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. Who are you? I shouted over the roar of the storm. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, watching me. I took a step closer, my heart in my throat. The wind howled, and I could hear the whispers again, a chorus of voices, rising and falling like the waves. Help us, Damon. I turned and ran, the voices chasing me all the way back to the tower. I slammed the door shut behind me, my hands shaking. I didn't sleep that night, too terrified to close my eyes. When morning finally came, the storm had passed, and the beach was calm and peaceful, as if nothing had happened. I never told anyone about that night. I didn't need to. My haggard appearance and the look in my eyes were enough to convince my fellow lifeguards that something had happened. Jess, Jamie, and Robert gave me knowing looks, their own experiences reflected in their eyes. Working at the lifeguard tower changed me. It taught me to respect the legends and the warnings, to be aware of my surroundings, and to never take anything for granted. The beach is a beautiful place, but it's also a place of power and mystery, where the past and present intertwine in ways we can't always understand. I still work as a lifeguard, but I approach my job with a new sense of respect and caution. I share my story with new lifeguards, hoping to prepare them for what they might encounter. The old tower continues to stand watch over the beach, a silent reminder of the past and a guardian of the present. And on stormy nights, when the wind howls and the waves crash against the shore, I sometimes hear the whispers again, faint and distant, carried on the wind. I listen, but I don't follow. I've learned my lesson. The spirits of Crescent Beach have their own stories to tell, and I have mine. I've always been a beachcomber. Ever since I was a kid, I loved wandering the shoreline, looking for shells, sea glass, and other treasures washed ashore by the tide. There was something calming about the rhythmic crash of the waves and the feeling of wet sand under my feet. It was my escape from the stresses of daily life. But one day I found something that turned my peaceful pastime into a nightmare I'll never forget. It was a cool, overcast morning in late September when I set out for my usual walk along the beach. The summer crowds had thinned out, leaving the shore mostly to locals and the occasional tourist. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of weather that made the beach feel almost deserted. I didn't mind, it meant I could have the place to myself. I parked my car in the nearly empty lot and made my way down the narrow path to the beach. The air was crisp, and I zipped up my jacket as a breeze blew in from the ocean. The tide was low, revealing a wide expanse of wet sand dotted with shells and seaweed. I began my usual route, eyes scanning the ground for anything interesting. About half an hour into my walk, I spotted something unusual in the distance. At first, it looked like a large piece of driftwood half buried in the sand. But as I got closer, I realized it was too symmetrical, too polished to be a natural object. My curiosity piqued. I hurried over to investigate. What I found was a small wooden chest, about the size of a shoebox, partially covered in seaweed and sand. It looked old, the wood weathered and darkened by the salt water. There were intricate carvings on the lid, though many were obscured by a thick layer of grime. The chest had metal hinges and a rusty lock, but it was slightly ajar, as if someone had tried to open it and given up. I felt a thrill of excitement. I had found plenty of interesting things on the beach before, but nothing like this. My mind raced with possibilities: pirate treasure, a time capsule, some forgotten relic of the past. I brushed off the sand and seaweed as best I could and carried the chest to a large rock nearby. My hands trembled with anticipation as I carefully pried the lid open. Inside the chest, I found a collection of odd items, each one stranger than the last. There were old photographs, yellowed with age, depicting people in clothing from the early 1900s. Most of the faces were blurred or scratched out, giving the images a haunting quality. There was a small leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and stained. As I flipped through it, I saw that it was filled with handwritten notes in a language I didn't recognize. But the most unsettling item was a small, intricately carved wooden figurine. It was about 6 inches tall and depicted a humanoid figure with elongated limbs and a distorted face. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. Its eyes seemed to follow me, no matter how I turned it. As I examined the items, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The beach was silent except for the gentle lapping of the waves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking nearby, but the beach was empty. I decided to take the chest and its contents back to my car. Maybe I could find someone who could translate the journal or identify the figurine. As I walked back, I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there, but the feeling persisted. Back home, I spread the contents of the chest out on my dining room table. I examined the photographs more closely, looking for any clues about their origin. One of them caught my eye. It showed a large, stately mansion with a group of people standing in front of it. The house looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. I decided to start with the journal. Even though I couldn't read the language, I hoped I might find a name or a date that could help me identify it. I spent hours poring over the pages, but it was no use. Frustrated, I turned to the internet for help. I posted pictures of the journal and the figurine on various forums, asking if anyone could recognize the language or the symbols. It didn't take long for someone to respond. A user who claimed to be an expert in ancient languages identified the writing as a form of archaic Latin, used in secret societies and occult practices. The symbols, he said, were related to dark rituals and summoning ceremonies. His message sent a shiver down my spine. What had I stumbled upon? Over the next few days, I continued my research, trying to find any information about the chest and its contents. I visited the local library and dug through old newspapers and records. That's when I found an article that made my blood run cold. It was an old newspaper clipping from the 1930s about a series of mysterious disappearances in the area. According to the article, several children had gone missing, their bodies never found. The only clue was a small wooden figurine, similar to the one I had found, left at the scene of each disappearance. The article mentioned a mansion on the outskirts of town that was rumored to be the home of a secretive cult. I felt a chill run down my spine. The mansion in the photograph, the one that had seemed so familiar, was the same mansion mentioned in the article. I realized with growing horror that the chest I had found might be connected to those old, unsolved crimes. I knew I had to tell someone about what I had found. I went to the local police station and spoke with the detective, showing him the chest and the article. At first he was skeptical, but as I laid out all the evidence, his expression grew more serious. He took the chest and its contents, promising to investigate further. Word of my discovery spread quickly through the small town. People were shocked and horrified to learn about the possible connection between the chest and the old disappearances. Parents became more vigilant, keeping a close eye on their children. The beach, once a popular spot for families, became eerily deserted. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the case, digging up old rumors and legends about the mansion and the cult. Some people claimed to have seen strange lights and heard eerie noises coming from the abandoned property. Others spoke of family members who had gone missing over the years, their cases never solved. The mansion itself became a focal point of fear and curiosity. Some brave souls ventured out to take a look, but most kept their distance. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had awakened something dark and dangerous, something that had been hidden for decades. As the investigation continued, I found myself thinking a lot about the events that had unfolded. I had always loved the beach, finding solace in its beauty and tranquility. But my discovery had shattered that sense of peace. I realized how important it was to be aware of my surroundings, to understand that even the most familiar places could hold hidden dangers. The police eventually uncovered more evidence linking the chest to the old disappearances. They found records of the cult's activities and identified several members, some of whom were still alive. Arrests were made, and the community began to heal, but the scars of the past remained. I still visit the beach, but I'm more cautious now. I pay attention to the things I find, knowing that even the smallest object can hold a dark history. And I always keep an eye out for anything unusual, anything that might hint at the secrets still buried beneath the sand. In the end, I learned that sometimes curiosity can lead to terrifying discoveries. It's important to be aware of the world around us, to understand that there are mysteries and dangers lurking just out of sight. My experience taught me to respect the past and to always be vigilant, for you never know what you might find washed ashore. Our family vacation was supposed to be the perfect getaway. We were staying at a popular beach resort that we'd visited several times before. The sun was always shining, the water was warm, and the sand felt like velvet under your feet. This year it was my wife, Laura, our 2 kids, 8-year-old Max and 6-year-old Lily, and me, Mark. We were looking forward to a week of relaxation and family bonding, away from the stresses of everyday life. The resort was bustling with families just like ours, all seeking the same sun-soaked paradise. Our days were filled with laughter, splashing in the waves, and building elaborate sandcastles. Evenings were spent dining at beachside restaurants, where the kids would eat their fill of ice cream, while Laura and I enjoyed a glass of wine, listening to the waves crash gently in the background. Max and Lily were typical siblings, alternating between best friends and fierce rivals. Max, with his boundless energy and curious nature, often led their adventures, while Lily, more cautious and thoughtful, followed with wide-eyed wonder. Laura and I took turns chasing after them, ensuring their safety while allowing them the freedom to explore. Laura was the anchor of our family, her calm demeanor and nurturing spirit balancing my sometimes overprotective tendencies. She always knew how to diffuse a tantrum or turn tears into laughter. Our relationship had its ups and downs, like any marriage, but on this vacation we felt closer than ever, united by the joy of watching our children revel in the simple pleasures of the beach. The resort offered a variety of activities: snorkeling, paddleboarding, and even a kids club where Max and Lily could make new friends and engage in supervised fun, while Laura and I had some time to ourselves. Every day was a new adventure, and by the fourth day we had settled into a comfortable routine. It was a bright, sunny afternoon, and we had decided to spend the day lounging by the water. Max and Lily were building a sandcastle nearby, engrossed in their project. Laura was reading a book, and I was half watching the kids, half dozing in the warmth of the sun. It was one of those rare, perfect moments where everything felt right in the world. Suddenly I realized that I hadn't heard Max's voice in a few minutes. At first I didn't think much of it. He was probably just focused on his sandcastle. But when I looked over, I saw only Lily, diligently patting down the sand. Max was nowhere to be seen. "Laura, have you seen Max?" I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. She glanced up from her book, her brow furrowing. "No, he was right there a minute ago," she replied, her tone matching my concern. I stood up, scanning the beach for any sign of him. "Max. Max, where are you?" I called, my voice growing louder with each repetition. Other beachgoers began to take notice, their curious glances turning to concern as they realized what was happening. Within minutes, our frantic search drew the attention of the resort staff and other vacationers. The resort manager, a tall man with a serious expression, quickly organized a search party. Lifeguards, staff members, and even some guests fanned out along the beach and into the nearby areas, calling Max's name and looking for any sign of him. Laura held Lily close, trying to comfort her while barely holding herself together. "He can't have gone far," she kept saying, as if repeating it would make it true. I joined the search, my heart pounding in my chest, fear gripping me like a vise. Hours passed, and still there was no sign of Max. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the beach. The atmosphere shifted from hopeful to desperate as the light faded. The police were called, and they arrived with search dogs and flashlights, their serious faces doing nothing to reassure us. The sense of community was overwhelming. Strangers we'd never met joined the search, offering words of encouragement and support. Parents held their children a little tighter, the reality of our situation hitting them hard. Despite the collective effort, as night fell, there was still no trace of Max. It was just after midnight when one of the search dogs barked, leading the police to a small, hidden alcove further down the beach. Laura and I rushed over, our hearts in our throats. The scene that greeted us was one of heartbreak and horror. Max was there, lying motionless in the sand. He looked peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping. But there was no mistaking the truth. Our son was gone. The coroner later determined that he had drowned, likely caught in a rip current and pulled away from shore before anyone noticed. The discovery shattered us. Laura collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably, while I stood there in shock, unable to process the reality of what had happened. Lily clung to Laura, her small face buried in her mother's shoulder, not fully understanding but sensing the depth of our despair. In the days that followed, the resort did everything they could to support us. They provided accommodations, meals, and counseling services. The other guests, many of whom we had never spoken to before, offered their condolences and shared in our grief. The sense of community that had once been a source of comfort now felt like a cruel reminder of our loss. Returning home was the hardest part. Max's room was exactly as he'd left it, his toys scattered on the floor, his bed unmade. The silence in our house was deafening, a constant reminder of the vibrant life that had been so abruptly taken from us. Laura and I struggled to find a new normal, our relationship strained under the weight of our grief. Lily, in her own way, tried to fill the void left by her brother. She became quieter, more introspective, and often asked about Max. We did our best to explain, to comfort her, but there were no easy answers. The loss of a child is something that changes you forever, leaving a scar that never fully heals. The impact of Max's death rippled through our community. Friends and neighbors reached out, offering their support, but there was an unspoken understanding that nothing could truly make it better. The local news covered the story, and for a while our family became the focus of public sympathy and attention. People were more cautious at the beach, more vigilant with their own children. The resort implemented new safety measures, installing more lifeguard stations and increasing staff training to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. While these changes were necessary, they felt like a small consolation in the face of our immense loss. As time passed, we learned to live with our grief. Laura and I attended support groups, where we met other parents who had experienced similar losses. Sharing our story and hearing theirs helped us feel less alone, even if it didn't lessen the pain. We kept Max's memory alive in small ways. We planted a tree in our backyard in his honor, a living tribute to the joy he brought into our lives. Every year on his birthday, we release balloons into the sky, a symbolic gesture that brings a measure of comfort to our aching hearts. Lily grew up with a strength and resilience that amazed us. She carried the memory of her brother with her, cherishing the time they had together and drawing inspiration from his adventurous spirit. As she grew older, she became an advocate for child safety, determined to prevent other families from experiencing the same heartbreak. The story of our family vacation is one of unimaginable loss, but it is also a testament to the strength of the human spirit. We learned that even in the face of the greatest tragedy, life goes on. We found solace in our memories, in the support of our community, and in each other. Max's death changed us in ways we never could have anticipated. It brought us closer as a family, taught us to cherish every moment, and inspired us to live our lives with a greater sense of purpose. While the pain of losing him will never fully disappear, we have found a way to honor his memory and move forward, one day at a time.